has taught us that the configure worm has contaminated so far over 50 million hosts in more than 100 countries. So it's not a record per se. Some malware have contaminated more computers in the world before, but the way it is designed and the way it is built makes it very difficult to fight against it. It makes decontamination extremely problematic. Google tells us that a new website is trapped every 14. A new trapped website is discovered every 14 seconds. A trapped website is called a drive-by attack. This terminology comes from the Iraq War, where insurgents put roadside bombs, and whenever Marines drive by, it blows up. So that's exactly the same kind of thing that happens. A website is trapped, and when you browse around, this trapped website causes malicious software to be executed on your platform. We'll understand the consequences, hopefully, by the end of this presentation. As of 2005, computer-related crime has generated more illicit revenues than drug trafficking. So it's difficult always to have absolute figures because it's not clear what is counted and not counted, but it gives really an idea of the sheer amount of money that is generated out of this kind of criminal activity. And something that is very important now to note in 2009 is that malware is used for extremely precise, lucrative criminal purposes. 10 years ago, viruses were written by underage teenagers who just wanted to destroy as much data as possible or spread one of their poems on as many screens in the world as possible. This does not exist anymore. Whoever writes a virus now, or a worm, or any kind of similar malicious software, has the very precise intent to make money out of it. And I'll try to explain how a virus writer can make money by writing malware, and you'll see that is actually quite a lucrative activity. So first of all, a very important distinction between two kinds of threats. On the internet you have targeted threats and latent threats. 99% of the threats that circulate on the network are untargeted, they are undiscriminate. The same distinction exists in regular criminality. You have thieves that want to rob a bank, who basically gather information before doing so, who know how many guards there are, how armed they are, how long are their hours, what are their personal situation, etc. This are precise, targeted, organized finance robberies. And then on the other hand, you have burglars that browse around residential neighborhoods not knowing what they're going to steal and who they're going to steal it from in advance. And so this same distinction exists on the internet, and it's extremely important to understand it, because the kind of means you invest in order to protect yourself can change dramatically whether you are exposed to targeted attack risk or to indiscriminate random risk. So this is the first distinction, and whenever you read something in the media about an attack having been carried out, I suggest you try and make this distinction. Was it something random and indiscriminate that spread over the internet and did not target any particular person, or was it a bank that was for example, that was specifically targeted by an organized group of hackers in order to steal customers' data and blackmail the bank, for example? So the techniques used are completely different, the skills required are completely different, the countermeasures required are completely different, so it's extremely important to make this distinction. So that's the first categorization that we can speak of. A second categorization, which is extremely important, is which technical perimeter is targeted by the attack. If you think of a computer network as a castle, a middle-aged castle, you have two ways of breaking into the castle and kidnapping the princess. You can either break down the walls using a battering ram, using a standing army and full force. This may work, but the walls around the castle tend to be quite strong, and it may work. This is the traditional way of doing it, frontal attack, breaking down the wall using the battering ram, but it's usually quite noisy, and usually there are defense up against these kinds of attack, and they can work, but they're difficult to carry out. Another types of attack that aim at kidnapping the princess are basically limited only by the people who carried out imagination. I mean, you can dig a tunnel under the wall, you can catapult yourself over the walls, you can offer the king a large wooden horse with armed men inside, or you can seduce the princess when she's at the market and convince her to come by her own will. So this categorization also exists in IT crime. You can either frontally attack a network, in which case you will target the demilitarized zone, which is this special part of the network which hosts servers that deliver a service on the internet, like the web server, the email server, the DNS server, or you have other categories of attack which will target directly the inside of the network, the internal LAN, called client-side attacks, and these are the ones now that are carried out. Usually in the media they often speak about frontal attacks. When somebody speaks about hacking, usually it's port scanning, it's exploiting vulnerabilities on services, etc. All these are frontal attacks. The real attacks people need to be concerned about are client-side attacks, and organized hackers and indiscriminate attacks alike use these kinds of techniques and target these kinds of perimeters. So modern hacking techniques target Windows workstations mostly. This is what one needs to remember. These are not attacks that target a server frontally, but rather workstations of users, of employees within the internal LAN using client-side techniques. So this is what I'm going to focus today. I'm going to show you a demonstration of how a client-side attack is carried out, and we're going to study the implications and how to protect oneself against such threats. I was telling you that cybercrime is now a business. Nobody writes malware anymore just for fun or just for the sake of it. The goal is to earn money. And so this is a graph that you've probably seen already, published by Symantec last year, that gives an estimate of the kind of cost involved in different criminal services, the IT criminal services. The third line, starting from the bottom, called proxies, is especially important because this is what allows criminals to make the most money. And if anyone has any ambition of doing such things, this would definitely be the best business model and definitely be the most lucrative activity. And I'm going to explain how and how much money can be earned. So think of it this way. Spammers make a lot of money because it's free to send emails, even if it's only 0.01% of people who open these ads of Viagra and stuff like this. When you put this to the power of the 10 million people who receive these emails, you can make a lot of money. So spammers make a lot of money. In order to send out their spam, they need anonymous proxies on the internet because otherwise they get caught. Sending spam is illegal in most legislations. So how do they do this? They basically rent proxies to virus writers who in turn write viruses that transform infected hosts into anonymous proxies. So now a virus writer will basically write a virus that he will try to spread as much as possible. Each infected host will be transformed into a zombie, so it's an anonymous, typically spam relaying host, and will rent these out to spammers. And so there is actually a price, anonymous relay price that fluctuates with time. In summer, it's typically a bit more expensive to rent an anonymous proxy because there are less viruses around. In winter, it's a bit more expensive. So I checked this morning. It costs $0.25 as of today, 8th of August 2009, to rent an anonymous proxy. So imagine you write a virus. You infect 10 million machines in the world, which is the typical infection rate of an efficient malware. You rent each proxy 10 times to 10 different spammers. You charge $0.25 for each proxy you rent or sell. Writing an efficient malware typically takes 1 to 2 weeks, and so you can see the kind of profit. The turnover here would be $25 million. Let's say you pay $50,000 for the development of the malware. This is a highly, highly lucrative business. By writing malware, you can earn a vast sum of money by different ways, and one of the best ways to earn money is to transform infected hosts into proxies and to sell these proxies to spammers or hackers or anyone who basically requires full anonymity on the internet and capacity to deliver large traffic to multiple destinations. So now this is an activity that has flourished in Russia especially, and People say the Americans have illustrated themselves with the Silicon Valley and strong innovation in IT. I would say that the Russians have innovated by illustrating themselves in computer crime, a new way to make money using such skills. Obviously, impunity on the internet is almost guaranteed because going through a proxy is quite trivial, whereas for the law enforcement, going through several legislations is extremely difficult. And in addition to that, people can benefit from free anonymous connection points, namely Wi-Fi networks. Here in Palexpo, you have 3 or 4 different Wi-Fi choices. We made the test for the Swiss TV last year. We went on the roof of the UN with a large antenna like this that costs $50 on the internet, and we're able to catch 150 unencrypted wireless networks. So this means we had a choice of 150 different broadband internet access points that were completely anonymous and quite user-friendly, actually. So I've made these two very important distinctions. Information risk and IT attacks can be either latent or targeted, or can target either the demilitarized zone, can be either frontal or client side. Every time you hear about a hacking attack being carried out, it's important, I believe, to understand in which of these two categories it belongs to. Now, there are very important principles underlying information risk. For example, the difference between security and safety is critical. It's very well understood in physical security. One understands that a beautiful apartment with precious paintings is more at risk than a small apartment with no valuables is if the two have the same kind of lock on the doors. And so the same thing exists in IT. Exposure to risk determines the kind of security that needs to be put in place. So the more exposed to risk you are, the more security you need in order to achieve the same safety level. So security is an absolute notion, whereas safety is a relative notion and depends on the exposure to risk. And this seems trivial once it's formulated, but is very rarely implemented in real life.